As Catholics around the world continue to pray for the pontiff's recovery, I'm now joined by Reverend Mzwandile Molo for some reflection on the Pope's work to date and his impact on the faith. Rev, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. As we're hearing there from Cardinal Stephen, the prayers have not only been coming from the Catholic Church. In fact, if you have a look, prayers have been said for the pontiff from all sorts of places, from the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in Egypt, who has a close bond with Pope Francis, to an inter-religious service at a Buddhist temple in Colombo in Sri Lanka. What does that say about the work of Pope Francis?
Greetings, Thabo, and greetings to everybody who's viewing the program today. Indeed, Thabo, the news of the frailty of the Pope's physical body has led to many in the world to reflect deeply on what it means for the people of faith, but also for Christian faith in particular. And because of what he remains and reflects in the best traditions of what it is to be a Christian, we know that his pontificate is one of consequential leadership. It is one that brought the world to remember the tenderness of God, that God at best is tender, that God at best is love. And because we have felt God's love in his own presence, in his own ministry, in his own simplicity, and his own commitment to what it is to be a human being and inspired by the faith that we all profess, he has shown us that the world is best when the world works together, when the world reaches to each other beyond our own narrow, limited views of who we are and our own narrow views of the world, the way we see the world. And this is important, Thabo, in a space and a time in the world where brutality, where domination, where in many cases, where narrow nationalism has become a way of defining the world and defining of who we are. The Pope's life is an antithesis to that kind of world. And he says to us, we all need to find a way to live with the tenderness of the heart of God that allows us to see in the stranger, in the migrant, in the lost, in the weak, in the poor, and those excluded from economic power, the beauty of what God has created, and extend that arm of God so that we can all work together. So the SACC is concerned about his health, but is also proud of his ministry.
A spiritual man, very stubborn man, others are saying, very determined. But, I mean, what does that tell us about his sense of mission and how seriously he is taking this calling, that even on his hospital bed, we're told he has conducted a lot of the business to still show that he is still in charge?
Thabo, I mean, the reports that we receive is that as he woke up this morning, he shared with the world his own gratitude, his own sense of humility with what the world is responding to in his own state of health challenge. The reports we received are saying things like the following. He says, I quote, "I feel my heart the blessing that is hidden within frailty, because it's precisely these moments that we learn even more to trust in the Lord," unquote. That kind of person shows a deep sense of commitment to the mission that God has for him and the church as general, but also the love that humanity shares with him as an inspiration for the way we can be in the world. And therefore, Thabo, when you want to stand up for that which is right, when you want to stand up for which is good, there's a sense of stubbornness that you must show, because the world we live in lives with indifference. The world we live in is a world where the powerful just get their way. They do what they want without accountability. And therefore, there's a need of humility, yet stubborn humility, that is consistent with what the faith demands of all of us. That at the core of what we are as the church is to serve humanity through the inspiration of what Christ has done for humanity, who has said, I have come down so that all those who are oppressed, those who are left out, those who are in the margins can find a voice and a place to be. So in his presence and in his ministry, we find one who is stubborn, not in wrong, but stubborn in humility and service to the world. Because if you do not become stubborn, Thabo, this world will always be dominated by those who are powerful.
Yeah. Now, whenever a pope gets ill, of course, winds of a conclave, they start to blow. We know in 2013, it was a historic moment where Pope Benedict resigned. It was the first time in 600 years that we saw something of this nature. Well, now, because the Pope, of course, was working himself and he called a consistory, others were suggesting that maybe he wanted to announce his resignation. Would it be too soon to call that out?
That is a decision that the Pope himself will have to make, Thabo, noting that he is better positioned than any of us to know his own health and know his capability and ability to execute the enormous responsibility of leading the Catholic people, because that responsibility is sacred. It cannot be taken for granted, and it is transcendent. It is one that transcends individuals and moments. So he will know better as God guides him to make the best decision as he himself sees the work. Secondly, that decision is left to the Catholic community, who in themselves are seeking God's wisdom and the strengthening of faith in this current time, who are saying to themselves, how do they make sure that they pray for God's guidance and inspiration in the power of God's love and care for Pope Francis, but also making sure that he cares for the broader church and what that might mean for them in this journey, in this moment. We trust their incapability. We trust their own sense of discernment about what God is asking of them in these troubled times in the world, where truth can be sacrificed for expediency, where the poor can be sacrificed for gain, when the stranger and the migrant can be vilified as an explanation of the ills of society rather than as an instrument of God's renewal for the world. They will make the best decision that is possible from where they stand. And we in the Christian community await their guided wisdom, and we journey with them at this moment of Pope Francis' health. But whatever else emerges out of that, we will stand with the Catholic community in prayer, seeking God's guidance and seeking God's strength.
We have heard the Pope finally in recent times being quite critical of the decisions, for example, that have been coming out of the new administration in the United States. How critical is a voice, especially in the faith-based movement, akin to that of Pope Francis, to speak out on such matters?
Indeed, Thabo, the Pope, in collaboration with other interfaith leaders, as you referenced earlier on, the Grand Imam, have been this conscience to society. And the conscience to society simply spoke to society in the tenderness of God, yet in the conviction of the need for a just world, a world where the stranger is not dealt with as an enemy, where the poor are not mere tools to enrich those who are rich at the top, where those who are vulnerable are not perceived as a burden to society, but as critical people who are able to contribute for the renewal of the world and renewal of creation. And one of the things that Pope Francis reminds us again and again is that creation does not exist for human exploitation. Creation exists for human collaboration with creation so that we can live in communal responsibility with creation, with one another. And that voice cannot be muted. And that voice needs to be made louder and louder, not only in the American administration changes that has happened, but also in a world where the values have almost settled in, that if I'm powerful, I can be unresponsive, I can be unfeeling, I can be indifferent for the pain of the world. The faith community, inspired by the ministry of Pope Francis, has to be inspired then and stand up and say to itself, all of us must speak of a God who is tender, who loves justice, who loves the stranger, who loves the poor, and sees them as an instrument for a transformation of the world rather than a burden to be carried by those who are powerful and rich.
Rev, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. The General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, the Reverend Mzwandile Molo there.